I'd appreciate it if you could expand upon the discoveries you've uncovered a bit more, especially the white confoundedness term, and if you feel it's different from the already used term of white complacency within the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities.
That's a good question. Um, I define white confoundedness as a toxic mix of many factors living within those who believe they are white. Um, these include feelings of, and there's many, guilt, naivete, defensiveness, obliviousness, fear, anger, outrage, trauma, resistance to change, being ill informed, avoidance of history, denial, silence, arrogance, and many, many others. The best way to portray what I mean by this definition of white confoundedness are in actual statements that people who believe they are white have said to me, such as, and these are all quote unquotes, I had or have black neighbors, friends, coworkers, and I always got or get along with them. And I'm just going to read through these. I may comment along the way, but I've been profiled too, quote unquote, or I've experienced reverse racism in my job. I'm afraid of, and then blank space. Um, I'm afraid of. There's an infinite array of possibilities within that term, and I'm going to get back to that in a second and fill in a blank with an example. But I just want to go through these initial questions and statements that have been made to me. But what can one person do? That's just that's an excuse riddled question. I mean, that's just more of a rhetorical statement of not doing anything. Uh, Next one, I don't see color or I'm colorblind. That's an arrogant statement, ignorant statement. Sorry if I'm offending anybody who's listening, but if you're a black person or a brown person or red or yellow tinge, and somebody says I don't see color or I'm colorblind, that's extremely offensive. Arguably, the most confounding is I know there's racism, but I don't believe it. And the person who said that to me even acknowledged that there was an inherent contradiction within those words. I'll repeat it. I know there's racism, but I don't believe it. This is when I began to realize that the racism waters were murkier than I ever thought imaginable, and it made me rethink the work I'm trying to do. But the absolute worst thing is when there's nothing said at all, and there's just silence or a complete lack of any inquisitiveness. Now, to get to the part of your question regarding white complacency, I believe that could be considered a convenient outcome emanating from white confoundedness and perhaps even a direct part of the confoundedness conundrum, depending on the circumstance.
Yeah.
For example, I go back to the afraid statement. Let's use the I'm afraid of statement to include I'm afraid of my safety. This is a relatively easy thing to say for those who believe they are white to try and neutralize any racism conversation and move it into the comfort zone of complacency by using the allegation of being afraid of something. An initial question I would ask in response to a statement like this is, so how do you think being fearful of whatever, or safety or whatever, impacts your daily life or basic freedoms? And in contrast to the variety of fears and challenges that blacks bear and have, is one I have derived from the Ta-Nehisi Coates book, Between the World and Me. His book is written in the form of a letter to his young black son about Coates' experiences living in America. In a mere 146 pages, the words fear or afraid were used 63 times in portraying the physical hazards of daily black male life. I know that at 63 because I reread the book and I counted them. There is literally no comparison whatsoever to either the daily fears and loss of freedom that blacks experience, even when just walking into a Starbucks in Philadelphia or bird watching in New York City's Central Park. And those are two actual, relatively recent examples. So I believe any attempt on the part of those who believe they are white in revealing their own purported fears to counter this incredible contrast within the black experience leads to complacency and indifference and is intrinsic to white confoundedness. At least that's
Hmm.
what I think.
I definitely, and I may not add or keep this part, by the way, but it makes me think the I was fearful of my life
Yeah,
uh, thing, where it's just like, and the story I'm gonna tell is because of that line, where there was the young black woman who was in a car accident, and she went to the first house that she saw, like she covered in injured, covered in blood, and knocked on the door. And the gentleman who opened the door and shot her off his porch with a shotgun because he feared for his life. She was trying to ask for help.
true story.
True story. So yeah, that fearful of my life thing is really a it's something that really does carry that negative connotation within my community. So because it seems to be the excuse everyone uses now for anything. If there's a black person involved, I feared for my life gives them the freedom to literally react any way that they want. And um, yeah, a lot of people have gone free doing heinous things while saying that line.
Well, the
So
other thing, even more, well, as interesting, I think, is I had my brother-in-law said a few years ago, and I can't even remember what we were talking about. It really doesn't matter, but it was about racism, and he basically said, "Well, I'm afraid too," and doesn't define what what he's afraid of, and just kind of walked away. So it's just it just it I just I'm just I words can't describe what I feel about that, and I can't imagine as a black person.
yeah, it's interesting because you know when you go into a personal story, when you go into a pet store and you get followed around a pet store, what are you what are you gonna steal at a pet store? Like of any value. You get followed around a pet store. The idea that when you like you're in a car with a friend and the friend might even be white,
Right,
but they're playing their music loud
right,
and you're like you see a cop in the rearview mirror and have a panic attack that might be the last time you go anywhere.
right,
That's a fear that most people don't understand. And when they say things like, yo, well, if you obey the law or anything like that,
right,
it's like, God forbid,
right,
pun intended, that person be a Christian. Because, because if they are, I'm be like, just like Jesus. That's the perfect swing back for them. It's
yeah,
just like
yeah,
Jesus, huh? Yeah, but yeah, it's yeah, it's hard for people to get across. In our first interview, we talked about how it's almost impossible to explain the effects of racism to a person who isn't racist. Not we're not talking about the people who are. The people who are, they know what they're doing. But a person who actually is not racist at all can't understand the mental defect and what comes from that defect
right,
to basically it folds back into that complacency thing because it really or not even complacency, confoundedness as you put it, because it's like because they can't understand it, it also makes them invisible to it.
Exactly.
So they don't understand that it's like, well, I don't think like that. What kind of insane person would do this? You must be overplaying the case. You must be using the race card. It's like, no, this happened. Like it's happening. It's like there's no way. So it creates almost like a barrier where it's just like denying your own instincts for the sake of looking good in front of someone.
Yeah. And then there's a stage even before that, and that's just unadulterated obliviousness. I mean, it just does. I mean, it's one thing even having the type of discussion you just had, but the majority are just not even. There's no there and the there and the there. There's nothing there,
Yeah.
and that's why I use that term in my title. And you may recall, I don't know if I, but it was a year ago, and I just updated. I'll have to send you the most recent Beacon article, but you're going to see a lot of similarities in this. But I was just interviewed by this online media newspaper thing, the Beacon again, like I was last year, and the editor, took out. She changed the title around to saying, How did she do this? She put in oblivious American or white person. I should reread it, but in any event, I corrected her on that on the comeback on the lead into the article. And I'm going like, it's completely redundant because white people are oblivious. So you didn't have to. That's it. I didn't use the term white in my, as you know, in the title of the book,
Yes.
and she put that in, and I'm going like that. That's purely redundant. It wasn't
Mm.
necessary. Anyhow,
On to the next.